Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. I'm your host, Kiana Canada. Welcome to the Kiana Canada Show. Before we get into today's topic, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. When you subscribe to this channel, what it does is it pushes videos like this up in the algorithm. It tells the algorithm that videos like this are important. But we must be reminded that just because videos like this are not pushed up in the algorithm, that is not an indication that videos like this are not important. And I'm going to try and I'm going to see if I can try and elevate my microphone. Let's see. Okay, maybe that'll do the trick. I know every time I'm on here, I always have like these microphone problems. Um, let's see. Testing 1, 2, 3. Okay. Try something else. I apologize. Okay. I'm going to make sure that we're good with the microphone. Are we good with the microphone? Are we good with the microphone? Okay, so we're having mic problems. Testing 1, 2, 3. Are we good with the microphone? Testing 1, 2, 3. I think that's just as good as it's going to get, ladies and gentlemen. So I really do apologize, but let's go ahead and get into today's topic. Before we get into today's topic, it is the anniversary of my publication that I published on Substack. Publicizing America's persecution of African Americans is a moral duty, not treason. And the reason why I am attaching this article to the description of this video is, of course, I am going to be giving some commentary on the Ukraine and Russia war. I am an American, I am abroad. And so sometimes when you are abroad and you are in conflict with your country, like I am, oftentimes what will happen is that any speech or any communication, anything that you say or do, it can be looked at as it can be looked at as treason against your country. But I want to be it's important to remind anyone that's watching this video that the content of this video is not to uh, provide comfort for the parties in this war. I am an impartial subject on the outside looking in. And of course, I'm just giving my perspective and my commentary on this ongoing conflict, which has claimed so many lives. Now, it's also important to understand that if you look at the content on my channel, I normally don't cover or give commentary about the Ukraine Russia war. It's always from an international human rights perspective. But something's different about today, and I'm going to be making a prediction that the Ukrainian forces, that Ukraine will surrender by the end of the year, if not sooner. And there's a couple of reasons why I am making that prediction, and I am going to be expounding on that in this video. This is coming just from, I guess, the perspective of somebody who's made predictions before, but not necessarily from not from a military standpoint, right? So, of course, I don't have intel, and I don't know anyone who is working in the military or who's working in intelligence. But it, based on the facts of this particular war, one can infer from those facts, of course, what the outcome will be. And again, I'm not making this prediction because President Donald Trump has said that there is approximately 5,000 casualties each day on each side. And I'm going to be going into that as well. But that's not why I am making this prediction. And I'm not making the prediction because I feel like Ukraine is the weaker party. Um, Indeed, there has been some instances where the weaker party has prevailed in war, but again, I am looking from I guess, an eagle eyes view, bird's eye view when we're thinking about this conflict. And just from my perspective, I am of the opinion that Ukraine will surrender before the end of the year, if not sooner. Now, um, so I have reasons as to why I feel that way. So right now, Ukraine is on the defensive. So in other words, Ukraine is it's trying to save territory that has already been annexed by Russia. And in my personal opinion, what this does is it makes it impossible for Ukraine to gain the advantage. And when you think about it, if Ukraine is persistently trying to save territory in its own country, well, it makes it very difficult for it to advance outside of Ukraine and fight Russia on its own territory because it's busy trying to defend its own territory, right? And that may be what Ukraine is seeking to do. That may be a strategy is really not to advance onto Russian territory, but to really save the um, the cities and provinces. I think it's what it's called, provinces maybe or cities in Ukraine. Now, like I said, this also could be used as a strategy for Russia because if we think about it, if Ukraine's attention is on Crimea and all of its soldiers are fighting to keep that territory, they're just simply endeavoring to prevent Russia from advancing further into Ukraine. And they're not really making any improvements or advancements uh, on their side. It's just more so, okay, we're just trying to really stop Russia from coming in further. And it doesn't appear to be working, unfortunately. That doesn't seem to be working. It doesn't that strategy doesn't appear to be one that is in my personal opinion that is going to win this war. Sometimes in war, and of course, I've never fought a war, but just I've engaged in many, I guess, legal battles in my life, right? And sometimes when you're engaged in war, legal battles, etc., sometimes what you have to do is you have to sacrifice uh, a want or a particular need for the end goal, right? And so the fact that Ukraine is attempting to save Crimea, that is an indication to me that they're not really trying to make a sacrifice for the end of this war. So essentially, Ukraine is trying to win every battle, and it doesn't appear like it is really focused on the end of the war, trying to win the war, um, overall, because of course, Crimea is just one battle. And even if Ukraine uh, even if Ukraine did manage to salvage and protect and to keep Crimea, well, that does not necessarily mean that that's going to happen for other territories as well. And so that leads me to my next point is that there are numerical weaknesses that comes from having to prepare against possible attacks. So if we are to take what Donald Trump is telling the public as true, so Donald Trump has stated in numerous interviews that there is approximately 5,000 fatalities each day on each side. Now, do I believe this? The jury is still out on that. But what I do know is that Russia is larger and much stronger than Ukraine, and uh, based on and of course, mathematics was my worst subject in school. But based on, I guess, elementary mathematics, right? It can be inferred that the one can infer that Russia has an advantage numerically over Ukraine just by virtue of it being a larger country and excuse me, and Russia having more soldiers uh, to fight in this war. Um, but of course, we've seen casualties on both sides. We know that on Russia's side, Russia has had to rely on troops from China. And with Ukraine, Ukraine has had to rely on the support of other European countries and the United States as well. But Russia has numerical strength, in my personal opinion, as it has compelled Ukraine to make for these preparations. So the fact that Ukraine has made an appearance in the United States on a couple occasions, asking for more armament and asking for more money to to continue this fight to save uh, those pieces of land that have already been lost to Ukraine. Uh, I think that we can infer and do so safely to say that Russia has a numerical advantage. Now, you may say, well, Kiana, well, how do you know this to be sure? And I don't know this to be sure, but what I do know is that Russia has not only China, but Russia has North Korea. And the United States, and this gets me to an important point, is that the United States does not want this war to be happening, especially not the Trump administration. The Trump administration, although the Trump administration has been vocal on Twitter X and on Truth Social about this war, and of course, his opinion about it, I really don't think that the Trump administration wants this war to proceed. I think the Trump administration wants this war to end because that, of course, would be a victory under his belt that the Biden administration could not accomplish. And when you look at the two administrations, and I'm just digressing from this topic just for a moment, is that when you look at these two administrations, Ukraine had more of a benefit under the Biden administration and was more likely to win the war under the Biden administration because Ukraine had more access to funds and armament, right? And so, in a sense, uh, what the president likely did or was doing is that there was a period of rest, right? And so interestingly, right, when we think about, have you ever do you remember, like, there's like this story or this fable, and it's a fable about the tortoise and the hare. And so the hare is taking off running, and then the tortoise, while the hare takes off running, the tortoise is behind, right? And then the hare sees that the tortoise has taken a nap, or excuse me, the hare sees that the tortoise is still behind in the distance, and so the hare decides to take a nap. And once the hare decides to take a nap, during that napping period, the tortoise gains and passes him up and actually wins the race. And so it was kind of like that, under the Biden administration, where Ukraine had an advantage, so that Ukraine was the tortoise, excuse me, Ukraine was the hare, and had a bit of an advantage, but then decided to, I guess, got complacent. And I'm not saying that Ukraine was complacent as in thinking that it could never lose the war, but there was a bit of complacency because Ukraine was relying on knew that there was always that nest egg to fall back on with the Biden administration. And so Ukraine, what it did was it took a rest for a period, and then that allowed uh, Russia to gain some ground as the administration switched. So, of course, we know that Trump now is in office, Biden is no longer in office. And uh, now Russia has gained a little bit more ground. But is that so? Is the question. So, what I think will happen is that Russia will continue to strike at what it perceives to be the weak points of Ukraine. And I think why this is going to lead to the defeat of Ukraine is because realistically, Ukraine does not have any military support. Now, international military support. Now, you may say, Kiana, well, what do you mean by that? Like, the United States has supported Ukraine, France has supported Ukraine, so has the United Kingdom. There is international military support there. But, ladies and gentlemen, let's think about it. Think about a situation where you are, or think about this as like a parent and then a child, and that there is an allowance, right? So there is an allowance that the parent is giving the child each week. Now, that is enough for the child to use, and probably to save up or to use strategically, right? Um, and to spend how they want to spend it. But it's not enough for the child to actually go out and live on its own. And it's the same thing in this particular case. Like, Ukraine, the military support that is being given by the United States, France, and the United Kingdom is just like an allowance. It's really not enough for uh, Ukraine to gain an advantage, even Ukraine to set all that, and to possibly. So let's say, for instance, there's something that Ukraine wants in the distance, right? Well, Ukraine wants to win. Well, what is being given to Ukraine is not enough to accomplish that goal right now. And so, yes, Ukraine does have the moral support of United States, France, and the international community, the United Kingdom, but it does not have enough military support to win this war. And we know that to be sure because if the United States decided to offer more military support, then what that would mean is that China and China and North Korea would enter into the fray. And that is not really what the United States wants, nor is that what the European community wants, because realistically, uh, both of those countries have much stronger militaries than, of course, the United States alone. And again, the United States is better off. The United States' strategy, the United States is better eh, as a uh, covert strategies or covert operations. That's the United States' strongest point in when we're thinking about war. The United States has never really been good at overt operations. It's always been good at covert operations. That's not to say that the United States hasn't been overtly involved in war, but when you think back to all of the wars that the United States has been ever implicated in or has to defend against, the United States has been at its strongest when it is working behind the scenes and with its intelligence and you know using intelligence to find weak points in the enemy's plan and the enemy's strategy. So if the United States were to come out into the open and were to act overtly, that wouldn't be its strongest point. To reiterate, United States is strongest when it is doing covert operations. And we know this to be true because we see this in a number of wars, and we see this in two present wars now. We see the United States acting covertly in support of, well, I mean, of course, it is overtly in support of Ukraine, but it is covertly providing this kind of support and, making attacks on Russia with Ukraine. Same thing with the war in the Middle East with Israel and Palestine. The United States is strongest when it is covertly fighting the war in the Middle East. And so in those countries, there's been a number of countries, and the United States hasn't been like, okay, when you look at publications that is coming across news media, it's never saying the United States is in war with the Houthis, or the United States is in war with Hezbollah, or the United States is in the war with uh, Palestine. And that's because, of course, that is strategic. United States does not want to be in the war with these countries. It wants to work covertly. That is, to reiterate, that is how it works best. So again, there is no way that, in my personal opinion, that Ukraine is going to advance in this war and that it's going to win. So the disadvantage also for Russia has disadvantages in this war as well. And the disadvantage that Russia has in this war is that it has the US, the UK, and France in Russia. And so what does this mean for Russia? Well, essentially what this means is that US, UK, and France can act as spies for Ukraine. And so they can get a better sense of what's going on in Russia. And then they can actually, create an attack. And so this would, I think, in my personal opinion, this is what is lessening the strength of Russia in this particular war, is that, of course, we understand that there is an embassy from the USA there, uh, France, and the UK, and all of those countries have allegiancy to Ukraine. And so if you have, and I'm not saying that Russia, excuse me, I'm not saying that the United States, United Kingdom, and France are the enemies of Russia. And so when I'm using this terminology, I'm just using it to better understand like the adversaries in the war, right? But when you have enemy on your territory, such as if Russia is perceiving US, Ukraine, and France as enemies, then they are able to cause some kind of disruption inland. And this is why I think that that attack happened within Russia. So there was a story where there was a general that was unalived, I think. So let's see. We'll read that story. So let's see. I don't think it's a very long story, but we'll read it anyway. I'm gonna just check to see if the story is showing up. I don't think that the story is showing up yet. No. Okay, so let me do it again, ladies and gentlemen. Um, Let me see, because I tried to let's see. So for some reason, it's not letting me share the BBC story. There was a BBC story, ladies and gentlemen, and it's called "Senior Russian General Unalived in Attack in Moscow," and it's not allowing me to publicize that for some reason. So let's see if we can share a different story, which is from The Guardian. Maybe that will. No, they're not letting me share the story for some reason, and I can't see it on my end, but let's see. Yeah, so they're letting me share it. So somebody is stopping it from, being able to be publicized, but that's okay, we'll continue. We'll just read from what is here, but let's see. So I'm gonna be very careful with my language because I understand that intelligence agencies are really looking at this and looking for anything to to try and find something. Okay, so a senior Russian general has been unalived in an attack in Moscow, officials has confirmed. Russia Investigative Committee, the main federal investigative authority in the country, confirmed. And so their general, I think his name is Yaroslav Moskalik or something like that, passed away when a Volkswagen Golf car was attacked, and after an improvised attack was within, of course, this vehicle. And so, as you can see, essentially, that is what the article is talking about. Is that there? And, ladies and gentlemen, um, so what do I think about this? Before I get into that, maybe I should get into that. I'll get into that now. So I'll tell you why this may be a strength for Ukraine, and then I'll say why I feel like it's a weakness for Ukraine. Now, the unalivement of the Russian general could possibly be a strength for Ukraine because what that essentially does is that there could be a loss of morale within the soldiers and within the army, right? Because anytime that there is a loss, especially somebody who's been, fighting the battle from start to, of course, that point in time where they have lost their life and has been with this group of people, there is a loss of morale there. And so when there's a loss of morale in a group of people or within an army, there is a possibility for there to be an attack. The loss of this general is also an advantage for Ukraine because, ladies and gentlemen, now there can be disorganization. Now that this general has been unalived, Ukraine has a likely advantage because any information or any plans that that general had, of course, went down with that general. So now there is regrouping and trying to regrouping and to understand the war from a different perspective, right? Because now this person is no longer there to lead, and that means that there has to be reorganization. And then the third reason why this is significant and strong for Ukraine is because the Russian strategy is possibly impacted. So whatever that strategy was, well, or whatever this general had within his mind about how to advance this war or how to move forward, or sometimes people go home and they go to sleep and then something comes to them in their dream, or maybe they're doing plans at home, or you just don't know, right? But whatever those plans were that was within that general is no longer there, can no longer be accessed because that person is no longer alive. And the fourth reason why this is a particular or possibly a strategy for Ukraine is that there is a possibility that in my personal opinion, that now Russia may be fearful that the coordinates are known. So, okay, so how did Ukraine know where this person was going to be? Is there a breach? Is there a blind spot, right? And because of this, now Ukraine has an advantage because now Russia is possibly thinking, okay, like, what can we do to fix this breach, and what can we do to fix this blind spot, and how is this a blind spot? How did this happen? And that is a possibility. There could be significant time trying to understand how that occurred, which takes focus off of advancing the war. So those are strategies, how this attack on the general is strategic for Ukraine, but it is also strategic for Russia as well. Because, for example, this that may cause the soldiers to want to avenge the general even more. Now that you've taken down one of their own, they're more determined, more now than ever, to fight in this war. So the energy that they possibly was conserving is now being funneled into fighting more in this war. And then, two, why this is an advantage for Russia is that now Russia could pay more attention to blind spots. And what this means is that where it wasn't paying attention before, it is definitely paying attention now. And so now this is like crossing the T's and dotting the I's, making sure every T is crossed, making sure every I is dotted. That means being extra careful. And then why this is likely a advantage for Russia is, well, this puts a new general at the helm, which means that there are fresh eyes on the scene. And this means that there's a new perspective on how to fight this war. And that new perspective could be something that Russia didn't see before, right? So, for example, when if you are ever an academic and you're writing a paper, right? And sometimes, like, you're looking at the paper and you're seeing some mistakes in the paper, but if you take your eyes off that paper and then somebody else puts their eyes on the paper, well, that person can see mistakes that you looked over and that you didn't identify. And it's the same thing here, is that now there is possibly a new person that is going to be, um, promoted to that position. And that means that there are fresh eyes to look at this war from a different perspective and look at it from a different angle. And this situation, it won't necessarily be like what's happening within uh, the Middle East with Israel and Palestine, because the difference between what's happening in Israel and Palestine is that every time that there was a commander that was unalived, Israel made sure to unalive those commanders, and to do so, like, so that there wouldn't be, you know, new leadership, and to ensure that not only to ensure that there wasn't new leadership, but to ensure that there wasn't any new perspectives to gain it and to gain an advantage. But Ukraine wouldn't be able to do this with Russia. In order for Ukraine to do this, Ukraine would need to rely on the assistance of its sister countries, such as, of course, why am I saying sister countries? That makes it seem like that these are passive countries. It would need to rely on the assistance of its big brothers, like the United Kingdom, France, and the United States. And these brothers are probably not willing to get into this war, because then that means that their families are going to be put at risk. And I don't think that that is what these countries want. Again, by having a new general at the helm with Russia, what essentially this does is it allows for Russia to really see where it went wrong, and to really pay attention to reiterate those blind spots. And lastly, why this taking out this general is strategic for Russia is because now Russia can use those exploited coordinates as a plan of attack. So Russia could say, okay, well, this is how they attacked. Once they understand how that happened, Russia could say, okay, well, this is exactly how they attacked. And this is what went wrong. Well, Russia could use that as to their advantage. And so when Ukraine strikes again, that strike will not be efficacious. It'll probably be a benign attack on something that's really not there. And so it can be like this faux attack, not necessarily a faux attack. Sorry. I really don't know military lingo. So, for example, Ukraine could attack an area thinking that there is a, a victim or an aggressor in that area, and there not be. And so that can strategically work on Russia's behalf. Oh, Lord. And so, ladies and gentlemen, going to Donald Trump's 5,000 a day commentary, he's been saying that a lot, right? He's saying that there's casualties, fatalities on both sides. And I do believe that Donald Trump is very sensitive about that. And I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump. I don't support Donald Trump. I don't support his politics. But what I do know from watching a lot of his commentary on the war is that I don't think that Donald Trump really likes that people are being unalived on both sides. And I can say that from the bottom of my heart that I do feel that way. And I think that most Americans and most people across the world, we don't like to see these casualties happening because we understand that that can happen to any person at any place at any time. It really something that's frightening to think about. And so I think that when Trump is saying that he wants this conflict to end, I think that he is genuine in that, but of course, I don't think that he knows exactly how to end the conflict. And I also think that by blurting out that there is 5,000 casualties on each side, this, ladies and gentlemen, it could just be used as propaganda purposes to get Russia to feel complacent about its positioning in the conflict. And we know that that is true because what happened was Donald Trump, okay, let me go back. So by saying that, that could, in a sense, have Russia feeling that it is at a greater position of winning than it really is. And that would cause Russia to use more resources to try and end the war, or to try and gain an advantage, which is what has already happened because after that meeting in the Oval Office where Trump cited those statistics, and then subsequently Trump cited those statistics again, there was a large attack in Ukraine. And so, was that attack strategic? Was that a good attack? It remains to be seen, but I think that could possibly end up hurting uh, Russia in the long run. And because again, I think what that did was that enticed Russia to, like, come out and attack Ukraine, and when you do that, you're using more resource sources, you're sacrificing more men, you are opening up more areas that are supposed to be protected, so now more areas are vulnerable, and that lets the enemy, if that is who you're calling your adversaries, to gain a better insight into your plans. And when I think about it, indeed. So what it does, of course, is it gives a person more information. So it gives Ukraine more information into your weak points. Excuse me. And so does that benefit Ukraine? And well, of course, like I said, to reiterate, well, what it does is it gives Ukraine more information into Russia's weak points, so that puts Ukraine at a slight advantage. Um, but there's already so much that I think is present in this particular case, or excuse me, in this particular conflict, that is signaling that this war is going to end and that Ukraine is going to lose. There's already uh, conceding of the war where Ukraine said that it was willing to give up its minerals in the land, not only to give up those minerals in its land, but it was willing to, Zelensky said he was willing to step down from leadership if Russia would end the war if there was a peace agreement signed, and that was a sign of weakness in Trump's opinion. And that was a sign of weakness on the world stage because now you're saying that you would do anything to end the war. And ladies and gentlemen, we don't need to take that as something negative. Sometimes you have to admit defeat when there is someone stronger than you, um, that you just can't win against. And I think that this is one of those situations is that Ukraine versus Russia in this fight alone without any military support from US, United Kingdom, France, Ukraine is not going to win. Now, if Ukraine's big brothers come in and fight this battle with Ukraine, then there is a slight advantage. But then now uh, Ukraine and its big brothers have to contend with Russia and its big brothers. Russia has big brothers as well. So yes, Ukraine, you have United States, you have United Kingdom, and you have France. And these are very strong big brothers. And they are to be you know, they're formidable and you don't want to mess with them. But also Russia has big brothers too. China, North Korea, India, these are countries you don't want to mess with either, you know? And by drawing these big brothers into the fray is very messy and could what? We all know the answer to that. That could get us into a world war that we don't want to be in. So, what do we take from this commentary? The commentary, I think what we take from this is that it's time for it. Well, I won't say that. I think what we can take from this commentary is that Ukraine can save more lives by deciding that it possibly will not hold on to Crimea. I think that if Russia has already gained that annexed that and has already claimed it, Russia is just going to, or excuse me, Ukraine is just going to spend more energy trying to get it back. But then on the other hand, ladies and gentlemen, this could be in a situation where Ukraine is saying, you know what? I am the leader. So Zelensky could say that he is the leader of Ukraine. He's the president. He is the commander in chief. And he is not going to go down until he goes down. And that's really unlikely to happen. Very rare do you see a commander in chief risk their own life and their own, uh, those that are within the upper echelons of the military and the commanders, that they risk that for the citizenry. And that's not to say, ladies and gentlemen, that Zelensky does not care for his people. I sincerely think that he does care for his people. What president wouldn't care? But that does not mean that just because he cares that he is willing to risk himself for his people. And that is the reason why this war is not he is not going to win this war. So my prediction, ladies and gentlemen, is that Zelensky, the Ukrainian effort, this war is going to end by the end of this year, if not sooner. I don't see this war advancing into 2026, 2027. I think this is going to end before the end of the year. That's my prediction. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. What do you think? Do you think that this war is going to proceed into 2026? Who do you think is actually winning? And do you think that I either party benefits anything from continuing this war? Are you anti-war like me? Like, do you feel that countries should not engage in war? And if that is your position, tell me why. These are all questions that I want to know. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. We'll talk to you next time. Bye bye.